Bonjour. Gonna wait just a few minutes.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour Bernie, Jen, Carol, Linda, Nancy. Ouais, après, il y a beaucoup de gens qui n'ont pas de photos. Flora, Sydney, John, Bobby. Seeing a lot of people. Is everybody enjoying the snowy weather today? Yeah.
Wait just another minute or two, and then we'll get started.
And Pamela says it's beautiful in Paris. So we're all wondering why we're here. Great to see people from all over the place. I know, Bernie, I assume you're coming in from Nebraska. Are there other people coming from outside of Milwaukee? Oh, Stepanka, are you in Czech Republic? Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we'll keep letting people in, but bonjour and welcome everyone to today's discussion with Pamela Druckerman about her new rhyming picture book, Paris by Phone, where, as we will see, the magic of independence meets the meaning of home. We'll also be discussing with Pamela what it's like to live in Paris, how she learned French, which included time at the Alliance Française, and the history and origins of the American in Paris story. Pamela is a journalist for the New York Times and The Economist, among other publications, and an author of many books, and is also an Emmy winner for her documentary work on a French forger who operated during World War II. Of us are also enjoying her educational Pandemonium series. Pamela is well-traveled and has lived in many places, and for the last several years, she and her family have called Paris home. So welcome, bienvenue, Pamela. We're so honored to have you here. I have a couple of questions, and we'll also have time to take questions from the audience. So please drop your questions in the chat, and maybe we'll be able to unmute toward the end. But before we get to that part, Pamela, can we ask you to read from your new book?
Sure. And Erin, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here. I've visited Milwaukee on a few occasions, and it's great to at least like drop in and see it again. So I should just, no further ado, start with the children's book. Just to warn everyone before I start, it's 32 pages. It's about 300 words. So don't worry, it's about my reading a whole book. It goes by really quickly. It's called Paris by Phone. Josephine Harris really likes Paris. In France, the kids eat chocolate rolls and take their poodles out for strolls. They stay up late to roast their snails and send each other French emails. At dinner, Joe says, "Mommy, please, the French would never call this cheese." This is supposed to be the Kraft macaroni and cheese. "And really, Mother, what's the use of life without some chocolate mousse?" Her mom, who has a deadline soon, says, "Josephine, go to your room." "Mommy, you're mean and you're not a good mother. I'll pick up this phone and I'll find me another." The phone beeps and it rings, it totters and tones, it screeches and scratches and rattles and moans. Joe drifts off to a distant shore, then hears a voice that says, "Bonjour." When she opens her eyes, she is in a new room with an elegant lady who smells of perfume. From the red of her lips to the beige of her sweater, she's like Josephine's mother, but quite a bit better. "Josephine," excuse my bad fake French accent. "Josephine, my chérie, we're so glad that you've come. My name is Odile du Château de French Bonne. Let's get you dressed and we'll go have some fun." A little boy who's named Pierre gives Josephine a cold French stare. "What are you doing with my mère?" "Pierre, be polite and get off the bench. Let's show Josephine how to be French." Those are chouquettes on the table, if anyone knows chouquettes. They're my kid's favorite snack. A cat is a chat and no is non, and on y va means come on, let's go. In gardens built for kings and queens, French children jump on trampolines. And when they're done, they shout, "Encore!" In French, that means, "We want some more." Josephine can't help but smile. Even the joggers run with style. They look at art, then watch ballet, and Jo receives her first beret. "Odile, Pierre, this is so cool, but don't you go to work and school?" "Welcome to the nation that is always on vacation." This is my favorite page. I think the woman in the blue sweater at the top is supposed to be me, but that's just my narcissistic literary analysis. I'm not sure it was really meant to be. And then Odile says, "To have the proper Paris day, we must eat oysters in a cafe." And Jo says, "Odile, pardon, I hate to be petty, but could I please just have some spaghetti?" "To grow your little appetite, I do insist you take a bite." Jo loves the oyster. It tastes like the sea. Pierre says, "Now you're French like me." But Jo wishes that her mom could see. Just then Odile says, "Look at the hour. We still have time for the Eiffel Tower." And Odile says, "The perfect city through and through. It's obviously meant for you. Stay here with Pierre and me. You'll be so chic, so French, so free. All that you need to say is oui." And Jo says, "Thank you for this Paris day, but I don't think that I can stay. There's someplace else where I belong. I miss my house, my room, my mom." Jo gives Pierre and Odile a bisou and tells the little cat adieu. The phone crackles and crizzles and sizzles and swaps. It guzzles and gizzles and rizzles and rups. As Joe's voyage starts to slow, she wakes up to her mom's hello. In Paris, I had my own brother, Pierre. A trampoline sent us high in the air. I even had a real French mère. The one thing wrong was you weren't there. Paris is perfect. I hated to part, but home is the place. They know you by heart. But when she spots her phone, Joe thinks, next time, Rome. That's it. This is the actual book. It's just harder to read that. But at the end of the book, there's le lexique, which explains all the French words. So the idea is that kids read the book and learn some French at the same time.
So adorable. I know you're well known for your books for adults. So how did you get the idea to write a children's book?
Someone came to me with the idea once Bringing Up Bebe came out. And I immediately knew that I wanted to do it. I thought it was such a great idea. I've always loved writing in rhyme. I was always the person who like wrote the song for your birthday to the tune of New York, New York kind of thing, all about your life. So it was my sort of like hidden desire to write something in rhyme. So I thought that there were so many interesting ideas to play with for a children's book. And then something happened. I had this incident with my daughter where I had an argument with her, and she actually said to me, she just looked around, she saw my phone, and she said, I'm going to pick up that phone and I'm going to call someone else and she's going to be my mother. She really said that. And so it occurred to me that the sort of, first of all, you're stuck with your family. You're really trapped, for better or worse, with the limitations and wonderful things that come with that. And the phone is the way out. It's sort of the like modern, it's kind of escape hatch for everyone. So I wanted to play with that idea as well. And I also wanted to play with the idea of Paris as the perfect idealized place to escape to, as the place where everything will be better, everything will taste better, will look better. And then finally play with the idea of, yeah, Paris is wonderful, but is it where you really belong? So I thought it would be fun to mix up that whole salad and write it for kids and teach them some French at the same time.
So what was the experience like working with an illustrator?
Well, first I had to find the illustrator, which was a really long journey. I wanted very much to work with a French illustrator because I love French children's books. I'd read so many of them to my kids, and I wanted it to have a kind of non-American sensibility. I thought there's just something unique about illustrations in each country. And I looked around, and then I realized that so many of my favorite children's books with different characters, different stories, were all written by this one guy, Benjamin Shaw. Maybe some of you know the Pamela books about the elephant, the pink elephant. But he's written his own books, he's illustrated books for other people. So I got in touch with him, and he lives in a tiny village, rural village. And I said, please, if you come to Paris, can we talk? And I showed him the text, and he went for it. He decided he wanted to illustrate it, and he did. He's just incredible. And it was fun to collaborate because as a writer, you're alone all the time with your computer and your thoughts. And so it was nice to have that element. And what's interesting when you write a children's book is you almost always cut a lot of the text at the end because the pictures bring so much. So you don't want to repeat what's already in the picture. And what I really love about Benjamin is that you all probably didn't have time to look at all the details, but he just adds so much depth and humor and patterns, and he tells so much of the story through the pictures that I ended up cutting like whole pages. It was very painful, but like whole pages of text by the end. So it was a very interesting storytelling experience too. And it was funny to come unhinged from fact. I mean, it was my first experience really writing fiction, even though it's a very short story.
Sure. So backing up a little bit, how did you wind up living in France and becoming a writer? I guess in the other direction, probably.
Yeah. I know, I mean, famously, there are many Americans who dream of living in Paris. I know because a lot of them are here and I meet them and they are living the dream that they've always had. I had the kind of opposite experience where I grew up in Miami learning Spanish and speaking some Spanish, and I became a journalist who covered Latin America. So I lived in Argentina. I moved to Brazil at one point and studied Portuguese. So I was very much interested in the developing world. I was slightly afraid of Europe. I thought it was too fancy and too fixed and too far along for me to ever catch up. And so, but then on a reporting trip to Argentina, I met a man who wasn't even French, but who was British and living in Paris at the time. He was in Argentina working on a story, and a journalism story. And the rest is history. I moved to France to be with him in 2004, not knowing French really, except for some classes I had quickly taken at the Alliance Française. And it was hard too. I think it's easier to move here. Of course, there are disappointments, but it's easier to move here if you sort of dreamt your whole life. If just being in Paris is going to be enough of a thing in itself to get you through for a few years. And I didn't really have that.
And have you lived in different neighborhoods in Paris or different parts of France?
I've lived almost entirely in the right bank, first in the 11th and now in the 3rd, which have become, I mean, I sort of expected that the left bank was the literary neighborhood of Sartre and Beauvoir and all that, but all that center of gravity, those neighborhoods have become so expensive. You know, there's famously like a Louis Vuitton shop right now next to the old cafes of that neighborhood. So the sort of cheaper literary, in quotes, neighborhoods are now all in the right bank, centered around the sort of 11th and 19th and 20th. So we're sort of drawn to those bohemian neighborhoods, and we've always lived there.
And I have cousins who live in Paris with lots of kids, and they spend a lot of time finding the best neighborhood to live in Paris. And as soon as they can, they leave Paris to go to their country homes. So I always think that's a kind of a funny thing, is you spend so much time being in the right quartier, but you seem so quick, or people seem so quick to leave Paris whenever they can. How's it?
I think if you can afford to, that's the ideal balance.
How is it raising kids in Paris? Because yes, it sounds idyllic, but it seems a little hard too.
I mean, I think it's a challenge being a foreigner everywhere, and especially in a place like Paris, where people tell you very quickly that you've broken some kind of social rule or code, even if it's just with a look. It's a very demanding place, especially sort of central Paris. But when I had a child here, I have 3 kids and they were all born here. I wasn't sort of expecting to admire or find interesting French parenting. It wasn't anything that anyone had told me about. To the contrary, the American parents I knew in Paris had all warned me that French mothers don't breastfeed, that they just deposit their kids in the creche and go on with their lives. And it was sort of almost like this 19th century story of wet nurses and kind of these bourgeois women who didn't care at all about their kids. And then once I had a child, I started to notice all these differences that were really interesting. Like their baby seemed to sleep through the night very quickly. And there was this incredible social system of creches that you could put your kid in. And like we actually did it. And it turned out not to be terrible at all, but actually quite wonderful, with well-trained, well-paid, stable caretakers. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And then the food started it. And I noticed that the creche, which is now a kind of well-known phenomenon, that the kids would have, 4 or 5 course meals when they were 1 or 2 years old, and that they would try all kinds of new foods. And so I sort of, I decided that this was something I urgently needed to know about as a parent, but that it was also journalistically, anthropologically interesting. And that I wanted in some way to tell a story about France through the story of their child rearing, not all of which is perfect or great or ideal. There are still traces in the culture of those, mothers who dropped their kids off at their babies off at wet nurses and came back 2 years later hoping the kids were okay, which often they weren't. But the sense that I got from in all kinds of directions, that mothers, and the traces of that, that the idea that mothers deserve to have lives of their own, that they needn't kind of sacrifice everything as proof that they're good parents, that it's okay to have many roles, you know, as a mother, as a worker, that it's important for your kids to, for the mother to keep working, to show them, to set an example for them, and to have your own money and your own power in a marriage. I find all of this challenging and intriguing, and in some ways, an interesting, not on all points, but in many, kind of mirror image of what I was seeing in America and the sort of American assumptions. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but it's a very big question, and it has a lot of dimensions.
And I think something that's nice in France is congé maternité, which gets longer and longer the more kids you have.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most remarkable things I realized raising kids in France is just how little support we have in America, how little government support, and how America is alone among developed countries of not having national paid maternity leave, not really helping most mothers at all until their kids turn 5. So you have like sort of 4 or 5 years before that of just being on your own. The expense, the very high expense of childcare, the uneven quality of that childcare. It's just remarkable how much lip service we pay to family values, but how little we actually do to help families, especially in the early years, and especially mothers. So that made me a kind of, I felt that American parents didn't really know this. that we thought, and famously we sort of blame ourselves. We for all the difficulties we have and the stress of parenting, and I thought, okay, yeah, there's some stress built into being responsible for an infant and a small child, but so much of the stress that American parents and mothers in particular were feeling was because they didn't have any government support, and that this wasn't normal. It might be normal in America, but in the rest of the world, it's not. So I felt on a kind of political mission to share the good word about what happens elsewhere, at least to sort of spell it out, and let people do with that information what they will. And I think I started doing that at a time when you had people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and all kinds of politicians talking about the absence of services in America, not just for kids, but on all kinds of levels, that are these same services that are very present in the rest of the developed world, like in every country in Europe, for example, in Australia and in Canada, and then in many countries in Latin America. I visited Ukraine when I was promoting the Ukrainian translation of Bringing Up Bébé, and like they have incredible childcare services. These places that you would think would be not as developed as the US are actually in this realm just far ahead of us.
And there's the childcare, there's also healthcare, and this may have changed, but I know my mother's French, and we moved here, and her first doctor's appointment, she got a call a few minutes after the doctor's appointment was supposed to happen, and the doctor said, "Where are you?" And she said, "Where are you?" She was expecting the doctor to come to her house, which makes so much sense when you have a sick kid. You can't just drag your sick kid and every other kid to the doctor's office. It makes much more sense for the doctors to come to your office, to your home. So it's just, I don't know if that still exists, but.
There is a service called SOS Médecin where you can dial up a doctor and it'll come to your house, but apparently those are not the best doctors. It's the ones willing to work at 3 a.m. and have and park on the side of the road. But yes, I mean, the medical system is another huge difference that I saw here. I remember learning that even undocumented immigrants in Paris have healthcare because there's like a special service just for them. It's weirdly something that Biden's been talking about now, but everyone's covered. They're not, I have friends in America, and this will sound familiar to you all, who are, have middle-class dual income jobs, but when somebody gets, God forbid, cancer, like they make a GoFundMe page because they can't afford the services. People who don't have the right healthcare famously cannot afford to get sick. And I just saw that healthcare stress did not exist in France, and it really doesn't exist in Europe. You're not worried that you're not going to have insurance because everyone's insured.
Mhm.
And I mean, for a while I was I wasn't in the national insurance plan, and I had to pay out of pocket for services, and it was just so much cheaper for everything, like by a huge degree. So that's another area where living in Europe has sort of given me perspective on the American experience. And the other area, sorry, this is not going to be a policy discussion, is college is not, people don't start saving for college when their kids are, you know, in the womb. It costs, you know, at most sort of a few $1,000s a year usually. So these are major stresses in American life that I didn't see in France, and that very much affect kids.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what are things that are better in the US than in France as far as child raising?
I'm sad that my kids are not going to go to school in the US, because I think there is an emphasis on creativity and that you just don't have really in France. My kids go to a school that has an English program, and it's only in the English program that they're asked to write stories, and on the French side, they're asked to tell their opinion, but it's much more regimented. There is really a lot of memorization and writing down the lesson from the board. But on the other hand, they do learn a lot of facts. You know, they're really made to learn history in a rigorous chronological way that I never got in the US. It felt patchier and more interpretive, and it's nice to have a sort of base of facts, I think. So that's I think there are pros and cons in so many directions. I think there's an openness. There's I think because in America, colleges want you to have all these other interests and hobbies and leadership skills and all that European universities don't ask for, that there is this sort of like drive to develop your kids' skills in all kinds of areas. That, I mean, there are kids here who are in conservatoire, who goes to special schools where you just play tennis all the time, but it's rarer. I mean, it's really much more academic here. You're not, and the third thing I would say is there's a kind of entrepreneurial spirit famously in America, which, like, if a kid is good at cookies, let him start an online cookie company. And whereas in France, it's there isn't that kind of can-do spirit. Macron famously wants it to be the sort of the startup nation, but I'm not sure that's really like in the water supply yet in the way it is in America. I'd be interested to hear what the rest of you think. I feel like I'm just, you know, spouting off on this, but that's what I see.
I'm going to a couple of comments from their comments more than questions from the chat. From Melissa says, I loved bringing up Bebe. It totally influenced my parenting. I constantly think about the CAD when making parenting decisions. Thank you for writing this book. Aww. And Flora says, Bebe made in France, tells her story with having a baby in France and all the cultural differences. The book is really good, and there's so much more than what she has time to say today. So,
oh, thank you very much.
A couple of comments.
One thing that was really astonishing to me when Bringing Up Bebe came out, and the writer was referring to the French title, which is Bebe Made in France. It's a little confusing. But I thought it was just going to be a book for American and maybe British parents, because I was describing this new style of parenting that had taken hold in the 1990s in America, where there was pressure on parents to spend more and more time with their kids. And there was all this new brain research, and everyone was worried about whether their kids were going to hear enough words. So there was this incessant talking to even tiny babies. Parents were supposed to kind of monologue. What I discovered once the book came out is that parents around the world were feeling this pressure too, to do this new style of more intensive style of parenting. So I mentioned I've been to the Ukraine, but I've also been to Brazil and to Russia, and I've talked to parents and heard from parents from all over the world who really identify with this new American style of parenting, which isn't that new anymore because it started in the 1990s.
Great. And Jean-Nicole says, Bebe is the only book on parenting that I actually found useful. It also helped my marriage. You're an inspiring author.
Is she married to an American? Is that
I think so.
okay?
I don't know if Jean Nicole is, but I think Jean Nicole is
Okay.
American as well, right?
Are you married,
Here's Jean Nicole.
married to a Frenchman? No. Okay. Oh, wow. That's interesting to hear. Because I did hear from, I wrote about, in writing about cultural differences, I helped explain for some of the couples in the book, like why they were having conflicts that they thought were personal differences, but really were cultural differences. And so I did hear from a lot of couples, mixed marriages, where they were kind of, it helped calm things down a little bit. It gave them a little bit of anthropological understanding of their own relationships.
So Melissa says, yes, the book gave me excellent advice. And then Bobby asks, are you in France right now? I'd be curious to know what your experience with the pandemic has been like.
Yes, I am in France. I'm in Paris. This is my home office. I've spent the whole pandemic here. I haven't been back to the States in, God, almost 2 years now. It's been, you know, I think everyone's had a pretty intense year and change. One of the strangest things at the beginning here with the first lockdown is that there were suddenly no foreigners. I live in a neighborhood, the Third, where you hear English all the time. People come here on like shopping expeditions, and I'm near the Picasso Museum, and suddenly it was just all French. And I felt extremely conspicuous speaking English, which I do all the time to my kids and my British husband. And another thing that happened is there were suddenly no cars in Paris. Like there were nobody with the first lockdown, especially. It was so strict that there was just nobody driving around. The streets were empty, and the tennis courts were closed, the parks were closed. The only thing you were allowed to do was go jogging, walking or jogging. So suddenly, like, everyone in Paris became a jogger, and we jogged in the middle of the streets. And it was, I think we all realized how tiny Paris is. It's a very small city. It's a fraction of London, a fraction even of New York City. And if there are no cars, it's quiet, and you can get from place to place. Like I realized I could run to the Seine, which I'd never done before, in like 7 minutes. So I think and I could run back and forth over the bridges. It suddenly felt like there was this beautiful tiny miniature jewel of a city that was all ours. It was like our playground. I would just run. I'm not a runner. I'm the laziest person, but I was suddenly running everywhere because it was such a delight. And also the weather was fantastic last sort of March and April. So it was a very intimate experience of the city. And I came away from it feeling a kind of ownership of Paris that as a foreigner, maybe I'd never felt before. It was like those of us who were there locked down. Maybe it was like the siege of Stalingrad or something. Not that, although that's a terrible comparison, but like we belonged to the city in a way that I hadn't fully felt before. And now we're at a different era, the era of vaccines. And as I'm sure you've heard, Europe had a very slow start, and France in particular had a very slow start. Or that it's now at sort of the level of other European countries like Germany. About 13% of the population has been vaccinated. There was a strong vaccine hesitancy in France. It was the strongest in Europe, and probably still is. I haven't seen any recent numbers, although as I'm sure a lot of you know or have experienced, like this is a contrarian country. So if someone says like you have to be vaccinated, the instinctive response is no way. I can't trust you. It's also a very low trust society, and with low trust of government, although a country that makes very high demands on government. But as soon as there was a shortage of vaccines, the demand changed, and it was, why am I not being vaccinated quickly enough? So it's been, full of paradoxes as usual. And the rollout has been increasing. it's been speeding up, and there are slightly more ambitious goals at the moment. Hopefully they will be met. And we're in the third lockdown now, which is not really a lockdown. You don't need to have an attestation to leave your house, which you used to have before, which you would write for yourself. And you're not allowed to travel very far. You can only go 10 kilometers, but I haven't seen anybody. I've never been questioned, although I haven't gone more than 10 kilometers. And all the cafes are closed. All the shops are closed except for essential shops. But the definition of what's essential has expanded throughout the pandemic. So now the plant stores are open, the bookshops are open, the art supply stores are open. So it feels a little bit looser than it did last time around. And the numbers seem to have, the ICUs are at 116% or something crazy like that. I don't even know how that works, but that has fallen a little bit recently and stabilized. So they're talking about opening things up a little bit more in May. So we'll see what happens. The schools have been closed for 2 weeks of holiday and 1 week of at-home schooling. But what's been amazing here, and this is a big difference with America, is that schools remained open from the fall until very recently, in-person school. And that's the advantage of having a totally centralized system where the president can decide if schools are going to be open or closed. You don't have to go to each school district or each state.
We can certainly come back. I'm sure there are lots of questions, but I was wondering about your path to writing the books you did, and also what the literary scene is like in Paris versus other places you've lived. There's like a good community of authors, or and maybe even in the past year with what's happened.
There is a really wonderful community of, I would say, a combination of journalists, foreign correspondents, and authors here. It's changed a little bit with Instagram, because now there are all these Instagrammers who have like 1 billion followers who I've never heard of, but who are like in their worlds, you know, they own Paris and they're part of Paris. So I'm trying to get to know that sphere a little bit more. I don't know if you call that literary exactly, but it's sort of media. But definitely the part of the Anglo-American Press Association, we just had an event this morning where we do interviews. We'll interview a prominent person together. We had Marine Le Pen on a few weeks ago, and we all interviewed her. And this morning we had Benjamin Stora, who's a specialist in Algeria. So yeah, it's fun to be a writer here. There are always people coming through, writing novels, writing articles. There definitely are. I have been at parties in Paris where I thought, like, God, everyone here is like a writer, an author, doing something really, a filmmaker, doing something really cool. Like, this is the kind of party I always wanted to be invited to, and now I am. Isn't this amazing? I wasn't really in those circles in New York as much. I was more of just like, I was a financial journalist. I worked for the Wall Street Journal. It wasn't literary or glamorous at all. Sometimes here it is glamorous. Like, I think, gosh, I'm really lucky. This is my life. But at other times I just feel like, you know, everyone's jealous and backbiting and gossiping about each other. So it's a mixed bag.
Sure. And do we have other questions?
We have a Marc says, ma fille dont son nom est Pamela habite près d'Avignon. Elle me dit que le nom Pamela n'est pas commun en France.
Yeah. No, I have never met a French Pamela, but I have met a lot of people my age named Pamela. It was a cohort name in the 1970s. I don't know, Mark, when was your daughter born? I would guess late 60s or 70s. I don't think anyone named Pamela has been born since like 1985, although maybe your daughter.
And then France is technically on lockdown right now. I think that might be. And then, was your book publisher an American one or French?
My first publisher was American, that sort of bought the idea for the book. But then it was when it was translated into French, there was a French publisher, which was Flanner. They were great. Yeah, and I did a whole like French press tour, which was really exciting to see how the book about the French was going to be received in France.
Let's see, I had one more.
And then
Well,
Deborah
general
asks,
question,
doesn't
do
the
you have
publisher?
any literary inspirations? Oh, sorry, that's cutting out.
Sorry.
And do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
We're just asking about other literary inspirations in French, English, any language.
My personal literary inspirations. I am. I now read almost all women. I don't know how that happened. It wasn't anything against male writers, but I noticed that a lot of my favorite writers are American still, and I really like essayists like Nora. I like funny writers or essayists, or it's best if they have both. I really admire Nora Ephron. Joan Didion is, of course, one of my favorites. I guess I admire the people you think I would admire. I've been reading James Baldwin recently. That's a man I like. I've very much enjoyed reading Janet Flanner, kind of Americans in Paris, and learning about their take on France. People who are having like a similar experience to me, but in a different era. Janet Flanner I like a lot too, definitely.
Then the question is, how do you think your book was received in France? And I'm not quite sure which book.
I think
we're
they mean bringing
talking
up the thing that I
about.
was just talking about. It was
Probably.
it was a very strange experience because they kind of got it into their heads without having read the book at all, that I said that the thesis of my book is that the French mothers are the best mothers in the world. That was the takeaway. So, which I didn't do a global comparison of all mothers. I didn't say the French were the best in the world, but so I had to like defend myself on, I went on every French roundtable talk show, of which there are like more than I had any idea, and radio show and France Culture and France Inter and all those shows. And the first thing I had to say was like, I don't think you're the best mothers in the world because I don't know that much. I don't know about Icelandic parents or Japanese parents or anything like that. And some parent I would say it was mixed. There was a kind of resistance to an American telling them how they parent, a kind of instinctive kind of cringing at me telling them anything about themselves. But then they would agree with everything I said about them. They would say, of course we do that. Or they would say, we don't do anything special. There's no French way of parenting. And I would say, well, what about all these ideas? Like, are they familiar to you? These things that I heard mothers say repeatedly, that I saw in the parenting books, that I found in the social science research into French versus American parenting, or just French parenting. And they'd say, of course we do that. Everyone does that. I'd say, no, everyone doesn't do that. You do that. So I got into some interesting conversations. Some of them were contemptuous. Some of them were respectful. I tried to defend myself in French as best I could, with varying levels of success.
Somebody's asking, would love to hear about your journey to learning French and how long before you became fluent, and also for your children.
I would say, I don't know what you call fluent. Someone wants to find it as like the native speaker doesn't feel pain when you speak to them. I think people still feel sometimes a little bit of pain if I judge from like the way they wince a little bit when I'm talking. It's very easy to, I got to a certain level. I had studied a lot of other languages, including, Spanish, 2 other Romance languages. So it wasn't hard to get to a certain level, but also to stay there, because in my situation where, even though I was doing interviews in French, I lived in English. My home is entirely in English. I only speak English to my kids. So I feel like it's been hard to get, even though I live in France, to kind of like reach the next stages. I have to really make an effort to listen to the radio all the time, or watch TV all the time, or talk to the friends all the time in French, because almost all of my French friends also speak quite decent English, or were kind of at the, some of them are obviously better than me. Some of us, sometimes we're at the same level, and it's this kind of battle. So I'm still not where I want to be, but it works. It somehow works. But I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of my French. I wish it was better. My New Year's resolution every year is to improve my French. I read Le Monde every morning and circle words I don't know, and there are always many words I don't know, and I keep lists of them, and I go back to them, and I work on it, but somehow it's like Sisyphean. I keep sort of pushing the cart up the hill, and it rolls back a little bit. But my kids speak wonderful French. They are fully bilingual, and they can't believe that I can't remember whether words are masculine or feminine still. They roll their eyes. I don't know what to say. You all probably speak better French than I do living in Milwaukee, but c'est la vie. I do, but then I turn on the radio, I understand everything, so I don't know.
Somebody is asking about the book Americans in Paris by Janet Flanner.
Janet Flanner was the correspondent.
I'm not quite sure what the question is.
So I mentioned Janet Flanner earlier. She, I was looking, I have her book on my shelf. She was the New Yorker's correspondent in Paris for decades. And she wrote Dispatches from Paris. She wrote The Letter from Paris. And so there are collections of her New Yorker articles, basically, that you can buy. I don't know that she herself wrote any book.
Great. And then somebody's asking about, is there a network of mixed genre that you belong to, or a network of American writers in Paris, probably?
I would say it's a network of Anglophones, people who from many different countries who speak English. They might be British, they might be German, but yeah, there are many different networks. Like there are sort of more French networks that I would also belong to through school, or whatever, groups of friends with whom I would speak French and would speak only French, and who are not literary at all. So I try to, as a journalist, you want to have a hand in lots of different worlds so that you get ideas from places that you wouldn't expect. You're always kind of trolling for stories.
And then Deborah asks, are you part of AAWE, Association of American Wives of Europeans?
No, but I love the name of that organization so much that I want to join it just for that. I don't know. I don't know. I'm aware that they exist, but I've never been a part of it. Also, because of Brexit, I'm not actually married to a European anymore, so they would probably have to kick me out.
And then Allison asks, what are you writing about next?
So the book I wrote after Bringing Up Bebe was called, I'll do a little pitch for that book, because it really is my baby, even more than Bringing Up Bebe was, I think. It was a memoir about entering middle age called There Are No Grown-Ups. And it also has a lot about France, about especially a lot about French women and how French women approach aging differently. I became sort of obsessed with this French idea of being bien dans votre âge, being sort of at home in your age. And it seemed like a really interesting cultural difference that as an American I could learn from. That I grew up in Miami, so it's an extreme case. It's like the home of plastic surgery and all that. But I found that as an American, I thought I was supposed to look as young as possible for as long as possible at any price, with any procedure, and and you kind of do that until you just have to give up. And I'm exaggerating obviously a little bit, but it certainly it's a value. I mean, you look at sociologists talk about this fear of aging, which exists in France too, of course, but there's this alternative here, which is the idea that you should look like the best version of the age that you are. And that if you're trying so hard to look young, that's going to make you look old. That the stress of like the fear of your own face is going to make you look terrible, even if you don't have any wrinkles. So I don't think even all French women achieve that level of being comfortable in their own age or being the best version of the age that they are. But it's definitely the cultural ideal. It's the model for how to be a successfully older woman here. And I like that. I take inspiration from it.
And then Jean-Nicole asks if you plan on writing bringing up teenagers.
The problem with teenagers is that they can read. So no, I can't do that. I do sometimes quote my children in articles, but I have to run it by them first now. And I did a very, what I thought was a very interesting piece. The research was very interesting to me on the difference between sex ed in America and in France. And I also looked at the Netherlands. And that I found fascinating. I could send you the link later. It's for the New York Times. If you just look up sex ed and Druckerman. It was about how the Dutch allow their adult kids to have opposite sex sleepovers, not their teenagers to have opposite sex sleepovers. And there's just a whole other approach. And France has its own way of acknowledging that, that acknowledging what happens and kind of allowing it to happen rather than having kids take vows of chastity or have sex on the sly.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I'm just going to put in the chat the name of the book you just mentioned. There are no grown-ups.
Thank you.
And Deborah, it says that AAWE even has a book on divorcing a European. So you should definitely join it.
Thank you. I want to do a story about them. I've always wondered what they're all about. I've heard about them through, I don't know if anyone here is involved with the American Library in Paris, but it's an institution that I care a lot about. And I've sometimes seen representatives of the American Wives of Europeans there.
And I see you're writing too a bit about how marriage is a kind of quarantine and different, which I thought was great. And do you think you'll be writing a book or more about the pandemic time as it processes?
I feel like we're going to be reading about the pandemic forever because so many writers have just been like home mulling and ruminating all these many months. It's been, I did write this one piece about marriage under quarantine for the New York Review of Books. Thank you for the person who put in the New York Times link. Maybe you could also put the NYRB link to this article. I noticed at what happened was because things happened first in China, and we were getting all these reports that there was a spate of divorces in China, and that these couples who were in lockdown together were breaking up. So then when we went into lockdown in France, I thought, well, what's going to happen to us? Like, were these marriages in China like fragile type to begin with, or like what's happening? Were these like people who were waiting to get divorced anyway? So I wrote a kind of humorous but true story about what it was like in our household. Yeah.
And then Robert Rasmussen asks, what do you recommend that someone in America who wants to move to Paris? When would this be possible?
It's, as you know, it's not possible now because the borders are closed to Americans, but I read an interview with Macron from a few days ago. For some reason, it wasn't widely covered, but he seems to be saying that it's gonna, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but he seemed to be saying that things are gonna open up soon for the summer, and that there's some talk of Americans who are vaccinated being allowed to enter France. So it seems like people's, and it, from what I can tell, there is an enormous pent-up desire among Americans to visit Paris again. So I think it's going to be, there's going to be an American invasion, which I would welcome, of course.
If you have any other questions here, we could continue the chat or do some one by one unmuting. There's a lot of people in here. Give everyone a minute. If you want to, yeah, either put your question in the chat or wave if you have something. Oh, it looks like maybe one more. We didn't read this one, right? The best parenting takeaway from the French that you would recommend?
I really like the French ideas around food. I find them extremely simple and instantly useful. So they serve vegetables first, and they don't let kids eat for the most part between meals. So they come to the table hungry, and then the first thing the kid sees is a delicious steaming bowl of broccoli with cheese on it or whatever it is. And so the child is much more likely to eat it. And then they have this rule that says you don't have to eat everything, but you just have to taste it. So because they understand that you have to sometimes taste foods 10 or 20 times before you actually like them. But at the end, you've tasted all these foods, and some you end up not liking, but many you end up liking, and you, instead of being stuck in this kind of ghetto of kids' foods, you can enjoy a whole range of foods and eat the same foods as your parents. So I'm probably making it sound slightly simpler than it is, but it's also not rocket science, and it tends to work.
Great.
Oh, somebody's asking, I see in the chat, why your publisher let you choose your illustrator. I don't know. I don't know why. I think because Benjamin is so great. So I brought them somebody who was just obviously amazing. So they did. I mean, I didn't get to decide on my own, but I suggested him, and they said yes. So I just think he has an incredible style. There are these recurring patterns, like the pattern in the just on the bed sheets you'll see throughout the book, and he's just so whimsical and colorful. And the feedback I've gotten from kids who've read the book has been thankfully really wonderful.
See,
and then Melissa says, did you read French Kids Eat Everything by Karen Le Billon? And what did you think of it?
I actually have not read it. I've just never had a copy of it, but I have read about it, and it sounds wonderful. It sounds like she was very good at observing what happens. I think she was not in Paris, but maybe she lived in Normandy or Brittany or someplace like that, and went into creches too and observed the meals. And yeah, I think it's a great idea to focus just on food and go deeper into that. I did it in a chapter or two, and she did it as a whole book. So there's going to be a lot of detail there for sure. It was interesting because if I'll just make one other small point, when my book came out, it was around a time when lots of books were coming out about how other countries raise kids and do things. And I think it was at a time when Americans were starting to kind of doubt that we have the answers to everything, and look around and say, what does the rest of the world do, and what can we learn from them? And that's only continued. So I think all these books, I just reviewed a book for the New York Times about how Mayan parents in Mexico raise kids, and they have some really interesting ideas too. It's just kind of interesting to open it up and see what your own assumptions are, what's cultural, how many of the things we think are natural are really cultural choices, and then to say, maybe there's something we can learn from other parts of the world.
Great. Well, I think we got all the questions, and it's getting late in Paris. So merci beaucoup for joining us. Everyone can buy your books at Boswell Book Company here in Milwaukee, or if you have any other suggestions as well, bookstores you're close to, but we love Boswell.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the nice comments. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. And next time I get to ask you all about Milwaukee, because I have lots of questions too.
Great.
Milwaukee's a great place to raise kids. Yeah. Despite the food.
So everyone's saying merci, and we hope that you can come to a reading in person soon.
I would absolutely love that. It would be my pleasure. Thank you all so much for showing up today.
Thank you.